Masters of the Universe wasn't just a box office bomb, it was a production nightmare that nearly didn't get finished. From a director who paid for the finale out of his own pocket, to cameras being shut down mid-shot, from Mattel refusing to pay their half of the budget to a contest winner who became a movie character, this He-Man adaptation has one of the most chaotic behind-the-scenes stories in Hollywood history. Here are 15 unknown facts about Masters of the Universe. Fact 1.
I see only He-Man.
Here's how bad the money situation got during production. Canon Films and Mattel had worked out a deal where each company would put up half the production budget. Canon told Mattel to put up the first half, which they did. Then when it was time for Canon to kick in their share, they refused. Mattel had to bankroll the entire rest of the production if they wanted to see their film actually finished. But it gets worse. Even after agreeing to pay, Mattel started having serious problems getting their payments to the production crew on time. Director Gary Goddard recalled that on several shooting days, a crew member was literally forced to put lens caps on all the cameras to prevent any more filming from taking place. Production would completely halt until Mattel came through with the money they'd promised. The crew would just sit there waiting, unable to work, while the budget ticked higher and higher. This wasn't a one-time occurrence either. It happened on multiple separate occasions throughout the shoot. The entire production became a constant battle over money, with work stopping and starting based on whether Mattel had actually sent their latest payment or not. Fact 2. The money problems reached their absolute breaking point during the climactic final battle between He-Man and Skeletor. Canon Films had completely run out of budget and made the extreme decision to shut down filming 3 days before the scheduled end date. On the actual day they were shooting the final battle, someone literally walked onto the set in the middle of a shot, picked up a card, put it in front of the camera, and told director Gary Goddard he was done. Filming was over. Without a proper finale, the entire movie would be worthless and could never be released. Director Gary Goddard personally financed the completion of that battle scene using his own salary from the film. He managed to keep only Dolph Lundgren and Frank Langella on set, along with a skeleton crew consisting of basically just the cinematographer. Because they had no money left for proper lighting or sets, Goddard made the set's lighting deliberately dark to hide the fact that everything around them was being dismantled. He later admitted the final battle wasn't very well choreographed because they had to rush through it in essentially one day with minimal crew and no budget whatsoever. Fact 3.
Let her go.
I don't think so. No.
Dolph Lundgren had just broken through as Ivan Drago in Rocky IV when he was cast as He-Man, but there was immediate concern about whether he could handle a leading role with extensive dialogue. Goddard was initially excited about Lundgren's physical presence, but quickly realized his thick Swedish accent was going to be a major problem for a lead character who needed to speak English throughout the entire film. Stallone himself visited the Masters of the Universe set during production. When he discovered that Lundgren had been given a role requiring extensive talking in English, he turned to a studio executive standing nearby and asked point blank if they had actually given that guy dialogue. When Sylvester Stallone, who isn't exactly known for crystal clear diction himself, is questioning your lead actor's ability to pronounce English words, you know you have a serious problem. Goddard desperately wanted to hire another actor to dub over Lundgren's voice in post-production. He even auditioned several voice actors and found one he felt was perfect for the role, but the studio refused because Lundgren's contract specifically prevented anyone else from dubbing his dialogue. Lundgren ended up re-recording all his lines in ADR to make them clearer. Fact 4. Mattel ran a promotional contest where the grand prize was an actual role in the Masters of the Universe movie. The winner was Richard Sponder from New Jersey. The problem? The production was already desperately over budget, severely behind schedule, and under immense pressure to finish on time. Director Gary Goddard had to somehow squeeze the contest winner into the shooting schedule despite having absolutely no time or money to spare. Goddard ended up creating a very small role specifically for Sponder and filmed it as quickly as possible. Sponder appears in the film as Pig Boy, one of Skeletor's minions, who hands Skeletor his staff when he returns from Earth. It's a brief appearance, maybe 5 seconds of screen time total, but Sponder is actually listed in the end credits by name. Think about how surreal that must have been. For him, he entered a toy company contest expecting maybe to win some action figures, and instead ended up in a major Hollywood movie standing right next to Frank Langella in full Skeletor makeup. For a He-Man superfan, that probably felt more valuable than any amount of prize money could ever be. Fact 5.
This way! Hurry!
Director Gary Goddard was completely unfamiliar with He-Man when he took the job. He was a lifelong comic book fan who had zero interest in making a toy commercial. What he desperately wanted to make was a tribute to legendary comic artist Jack Kirby and his Fourth World saga featuring the New Gods characters from DC Comics. Goddard structured the entire film as a loose adaptation of Kirby's work. He-Man essentially becomes Orion, Skeletor is Darkseid, Beastman is Calabac, Blade is Kanto, and Gwildor's cosmic key functions exactly like a mother box, creating boom tubes between dimensions. Comic book writer John Byrne spotted this immediately and wrote to Goddard, who confirmed it was completely intentional. Goddard desperately wanted to hire Jack Kirby himself as the conceptual artist for the production. The studio absolutely refused, telling Goddard that comics were just for kids and they didn't need some comic book artist. Goddard even tried to dedicate the film to Kirby in the closing credits as a tribute to his inspiration. The studio took that dedication out of the final cut. Years later, Byrne would call Masters of the Universe the best New Gods movie ever made. Fact 6.
Thanks. Come again.
Sure thing, man. Billy, get off the game and get...
Courtney Cox had just appeared in Bruce Springsteen's iconic Dancing in the Dark music video when she auditioned for Masters of the Universe. That's literally how she was pitched to director Gary Goddard. This is the girl who's in the Springsteen video. Cox came to her first audition wearing heavy makeup and trying to look very sexy and glamorous. Goddard watched her audition and wasn't impressed at all. He didn't feel she fit the part of Julie Winston, a teenage girl dealing with the recent death of her parents. Cox seemed too polished, too made up, too adult for what the role needed. Goddard was ready to pass on her completely, but his casting director Vicky Thomas insisted on bringing Cox back one more time. Thomas called Cox directly and told her to ditch all the makeup and come to the callback audition in jeans as herself. Cox showed up the next day with no makeup, wearing casual jeans, just being her natural self. She absolutely nailed it. Goddard knew immediately that she was the one. He later said Cox had great natural ability and did a fantastic job in the role. Fact 7. Mattel was extremely controlling about how He-Man could be depicted on screen. They insisted the character could not appear doing anything morally wrong whatsoever. No swearing, no drinking, and absolutely no killing under any circumstances. This created an enormous problem for the filmmakers. How do you make an epic fantasy battle movie where the hero fights an army but can't actually kill any enemies? The solution was to make all of Skeletor's troops into faceless robot soldiers instead of living beings. If He-Man blasts a robot, he's not technically killing anyone, he's just destroying machines. The film never explicitly states that these soldiers are robots. The audience just sees them getting destroyed in battle and falling apart. Interestingly, this restriction was later relaxed mid-production when He-Man toy sales started dropping significantly. Once Mattel's sales figures showed the franchise declining, they suddenly became much less precious about controlling how He-Man was portrayed. Goddard noted that after the sales dip, Mattel gave him considerably more creative freedom to do what he felt was right for the film. By that point, though, most of the battle sequences had already been shot with robot soldiers. Fact 8. Production designer William Stout had an ambitious vision for Castle Grayskull's throne room that required an absolutely massive amount of space. The set needed to feel epic and imposing, like a genuine seat of cosmic power. No single soundstage at the facility was large enough to accommodate what Stout had designed. The production team made a radical decision. They demolished the entire wall, separating two vast sound stages to create one enormous combined space. This was an expensive and time-consuming undertaking, but it allowed them to build Grayskull's throne room environment at the proper scale. Stout incorporated a brilliant design choice into the set. He built both good-looking and evil-looking architecture into the throne room as a reference to the dual nature of the power stored there. The layout became two-tiered. The bronze statue-adorned upper level represented the divine potential of Grayskull and its capacity for good. The gargoyle-like figures in the lower level suggested the more demonic and dangerous side of that same power. The set ended up being one of the few genuinely impressive aspects of the film, even though most of the movie ended up taking place on Earth instead. Fact 9. Bill Conti, the legendary composer behind Rocky and The Karate Kid, was hired to create the musical score for Masters of the Universe. Conti delivered a strong and exciting soundtrack that's actually one of the film's better elements, but getting that music finished turned into a logistical nightmare because of circumstances completely beyond anyone's control. A major musician's strike was happening at the exact time Conti needed to record the orchestral score. American musicians simply weren't available to work. The production had to scramble to find alternative solutions. Conti ended up recording different parts parts of the score with various European orchestras in different countries, working with different conductors each time. This resulted in wildly inconsistent levels of quality across the soundtrack. Some sections sound lush and professional because they were recorded by top-tier orchestras. Other sections sound noticeably cheaper and less polished because they were recorded wherever Conti could find available musicians on short notice. The score works well enough in the final film, but dedicated listeners can hear the jarring differences in recording quality from one musical cue to the next. Fact
All
10.
this time, Grayskull is ours.
Meg Foster, who played Evelyn, has genuinely unusual eyes that have defined her entire career in genre films. Her eyes are naturally blue-gray in color, but with abnormally tiny pupils, creating an extremely striking and unsettling appearance. She wears absolutely no contact lenses in Masters of the Universe. That's just what her eyes actually look like. Foster has been repeatedly cast in science fiction and fantasy roles specifically because of her eyes. She's joked multiple times in interviews that she appeals to casting directors because she brings her own free, special effect with her to every role. No makeup required, no post-production work needed, just her natural appearance creates an otherworldly quality perfect for alien or supernatural characters. For Evelyn, Foster's eyes added a genuinely creepy and menacing quality to the character that makeup alone could never have achieved. Her unsettling gaze made Evelyn feel legitimately threatening and not quite human. Foster has built an entire career out of this unusual physical trait, appearing in dozens of genre films and television shows where her distinctive eyes immediately signal to audiences that something supernatural is happening. Fact 11.
I dare anything! I am Skeletor!
Frank Langella is a highly respected dramatic actor with a Tony Award and multiple Oscar nominations. When he was offered the role of Skeletor in a low-budget film based on a children's toy line, most actors of his caliber would have immediately passed, but Langella didn't even hesitate. He accepted instantly and couldn't wait to play the character. His reason was purely personal. His 4-year-old son, Frank Langella III, was absolutely obsessed with He-Man toys and would run around the house yelling He-Man's battle cry while playing with his Skeletor action figure. Langella wanted to do something his young son would be excited about. Langella threw himself completely into the role and had an absolute blast. He wrote several of his own lines, including the philosophical question he asks He-Man about the loneliness of good versus the loneliness of evil. He worked closely with the makeup artists to perfect Skeletor's look. Nearly everything about Skeletor, from the makeup design to the costume to specific bits of dialogue, came from Langella's own suggestions. Decades later, Langella has repeatedly stated in interviews that playing Skeletor remains one of his all-time favorite roles, right up there with his most prestigious dramatic work. Fact 12.
I'll be back.
Canon Films announced a sequel called Masters of the Universe 2 at the 1987 Cannes Film Festival. Professional surfer Laird Hamilton was cast to replace Dolph Lundgren as He-Man after Lundgren refused to return. The script reportedly featured He-Man returning to Earth and going undercover as a high school football quarterback. Director Albert Pyun was attached, and sets were already being constructed when everything fell apart. Canon's financial troubles after the first film's failure meant they refused to pay Mattel the required royalty fees for using the characters. Mattel also hated the sequel's script and wanted nothing to do with it. The entire project was cancelled, but Cannon had already spent significant money building elaborate sets and costumes for both the Masters sequel and a planned Spider-Man film that also got cancelled. Rather than waste everything, director Albert Pyun wrote a new script combining elements from 2 previous unrelated scripts he'd written. The result was Cyborg, starring Jean-Claude Van Damme, filmed entirely on the Masters of the Universe sequel sets. Some television networks even aired Cyborg with the title Masters of the Universe 2 Cyborg for years afterward. Fact 13.
I'm going! Move.
Gary Goddard has revealed that the original script he received when he was hired as director took place entirely on planet Earth, with absolutely no scenes on Eternia whatsoever. The studio wanted to avoid the massive expense of creating alien worlds and elaborate sets by simply having the Eternians arrive on Earth right from the beginning. Goddard fought hard against this approach because it completely missed the point of making a fantasy adventure film. He went back to Canon Films and demanded additional money to add scenes taking place on Eternia itself. He had to squeeze every possible dollar out of producers Golan and Globus just to get the small amount of Eternia footage that appears in the final film. This explains why so much of Masters of the Universe takes place in generic California locations, instead of the fantastical alien planet fans expected. It wasn't a creative choice, it was purely a budget issue. The few Eternia sequences that exist only happened because Goddard personally fought for them. Without his intervention, audiences would have gotten a He-Man movie that never even showed Castle Grayskull or the planet Eternia at all. Fact 14. At 6'5", tall and so heavily muscled that finding a convincing stunt double proved completely impossible, Dolph Lundgren was required to perform all his own stunts throughout the entire production. Despite having an extensive martial arts background that should have prepared him, Lundgren found the experience absolutely miserable. The film required 2 full months of night shooting, which meant Lundgren spent 58 consecutive nights working on flying disc battle sequences in the middle of winter, wearing essentially nothing but a loincloth. He was freezing constantly and physically exhausted. The shooting schedule lasted 5 months total, with 16-hour days becoming routine. When Lundgren was offered a sequel during the actual filming of the first movie, he immediately turned it down. Years later, Lundgren labeled Masters of the Universe as his least favorite film role of his entire career. He told a French magazine that working on the film was a complete nightmare from start to finish. In 2010, he said he'd be willing to return to the Masters of the Universe franchise if they ever made a new film, but only if he could play the king instead of He-Man, and definitely not if it required taking his shirt off and wearing that loincloth again. Fact 15.
Woman at arms.
Masters of the Universe didn't just fail at the box office, it directly killed one of the most successful toy franchises in history. In 1986, the year before the film was released, the Masters of the Universe franchise was generating $400 million in annual revenue for Mattel. It was one of the biggest toy properties in the world, dominating the boys' action figure market. The film opened in 3rd place on August 7, 1987, making only $4.8 million its opening weekend. It quickly disappeared from theaters with a final domestic gross of just $17.3 million against a $22 million budget. The critical response was brutal, but the real damage came in toy sales. By the end of 1987, Masters of the Universe franchise revenue had collapsed from $400 million down to just $7 million, a staggering 98% drop in a single year. By early 1988, Mattel discontinued the original toy line completely and canceled the animated series. The franchise went dormant for years. The film's failure, combined with Superman Free, also contributed directly to Canon Films going bankrupt and eventually shutting down completely. One terrible movie managed to destroy 2 major entertainment companies simultaneously, from Mattel putting lens caps on cameras to a director financing the finale himself. Masters of the Universe's production was as chaotic as Skeletor's battle plans. Tribute to Jack Kirby disguised as a toy commercial. The film failed so spectacularly, it killed both the He-Man franchise and Canon Films forever. If you want more videos like this, please subscribe to our channel and comment what movie you want us to cover next.